had interviewed people that live in a building on 303 East 180 something Street, because we was on the DAP map and we saw that like that building had so much people, like they had 17 evictions in the past 2 years. So we had interviewed Andrew Darcy and Andrew Jones, and they just told us about like their experience with working with people from Wave Press Management, and they just talked about like what are usually the tenants' complaints, and the people that we also interviewed, they chose to remain anonymous, also told us about like what were their complaints, and it really matched what the lawyer said. And Jones actually mentioned that Wavecrest is starting to like do like new contracts with NYCHA, and it's just a bit concerning, because they're not really like the best management. So that's what our paper was really about.
Darcy and Jones are.
So Andrew Jones and Andrew Darcy are both from MFJ Legal Services. I believe it's called Mobile for Justice Legal Services. So they're just lawyers that deal with tenants from the Bronx, and they represent them in housing court. Most of the tenants that come to them is either it's for holdover cases about bills, or just like trying to get a simple date where the landlord could come and just fix something in their apartment. Like they have to take it to court because they try so much times, but it's just really difficult.
Yeah. And did you get that in your third draft?
Yeah, it's in there.
Nice. And the NYCHA part.
Yeah, the NYCHA part. It was just that like now Wavecrest's been like buying so much more buildings, and they're not known to be like the very best management. So it's just like concerning for many people, because it's like they're already not doing good with the other buildings. So how are they gonna buy NYCHA? NYCHA has a better reputation than them.
Right. All right. That's a really interesting fact, right? So that was one of the questions we had way back at the beginning of the semester, because Andrew Darcy came and gave a talk, right? He's this housing lawyer who's worked in housing court in the Bronx for about 10 years. And we were pumping him, right? We had him come in as a, let's get the lay of the land, tell us some of the issues that you see for tenants and landlords in housing court. But then once we had him here as his expert, I was like, so what's some stories we should be looking into? And he's one of the people who mentioned, well, here's this landlord and management company that we deal with a lot, that many of our clients are having a hard time with Wavecrest. And by the way, we just noticed that they got a multi-million-dollar contract to be an administrator for some of the developments through NYCHA. Not all of it by any means, but a couple of important houses in the Bronx. And so that's what generated our well, this guy claims they've got a bad record. Let's go actually look at their record, right? Can you talk a little bit about what some of the public sources were that you were able to use to tell that story?
We used DatMap. It was a source that Lucy
Lucy Black
gave access to, and it kind of explained. It gave us you can enter an address. It was like there was multiple different portables, and through one is DatMap exclusively, where it shows a map and you can enter an address, and it gives you evictions. And then another portal through that is where you can look up addresses that are associated with the same type of management, which is how we discovered Wavecrest Management. And doing my research and investigating, I physically had to count on my computer, how many properties they own in the Bronx. They own 392 properties in the Bronx alone.
in the city.
192.
192 in the city, and I think overall within the 5 boroughs, I think it's about 400. So majority of them aren't in the Bronx, and it was just, and a good amount of them, I would probably say over half of them had high eviction rates. Yeah.
Right. So those were some of the questions, right? Like
Yeah.
How many do they own? How many are in the Bronx? You want to clarify that, Jessie? Those numbers.
So because I did the spreadsheet for Wavecrest, and it was 300 in the city and 192 in the Bronx. And my focus on the article was mostly like focusing on the violations and like the complaints that the residents had in their apartment. And there was this one resident that in her apartment she's had like flooding in her kitchen from the ceiling, and like stuff that she like hasn't, everything that was on the DAP map, a lot of it wasn't fixed, and it's been like for a year that the cases are still open. So that was my focus more. So the article is basically like talking about, like in the conclusion I kind of made it like clear to the reader that if they keep buying property in the Bronx and keep on like not keeping up with their buildings and their residents, like they just have a lack of compassion. Like through all the information, you can see the lack of urgency to fix people's problems, and like they leave people kind of helpless and with no hope. So that's kind of what the future is going to look like if they keep buying all this property.
And not maintaining. And you're able to see what the complaints are, things as specific as there's a flood in my kitchen, there's rats in this room, there's.
And you see the apartment, the day the complaint was filed, and if it's still open, if it's closed.
It shows the type of complaint and the type of violation.
Yeah, it shows like if it's an emergency, like if it's an emergency situation, if it's, you know. And the person that I spoke to was kind of like, my kids can't live like this, like, you know.
And how did you find the people? How did you get to the tenant?
We went to
We
the
go
building
there.
itself,
Yeah.
and we kind of just introduced ourselves. Hi, we're Lehman College journalism students.
Yeah.
We'd like to ask you a couple of questions about your living experience here, and probably about
Most
7
of
out
the
of 10
tenants
were
didn't
no.
really- yeah, most of them didn't want to give their names.
And the ones
'cause-
that we did get to speak, they gave us either a fake name or refused to give their name at all.
And did they give you a reason for that? Why didn't they want to give you their name?
Retribution.
Retaliation against the owner.
Like they were afraid.
Yeah. Like just in the Bronx alone, there's 32,114 HPD violations. And that's not even including the other 5 boroughs. And just evictions in 2018 alone for the Bronx, it was 348.
From this management company
Yeah.
/ landlord?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like, even the lawyers mentioned that they're really known for their evictions. Like, they have a high profile of it. He was like, they usually like just take people to court, and they don't even want the case to extend. They just want to get rid of them so fast. And he even like mentioned that like for the cases, like Jesse Vet was saying, like it might be a little deal to waive press, but it's a big deal to the tenants because they're living in there. So they just like have a big lack of compassion. They don't really take things seriously. Like it's just like interesting how people have to go to court to just get a date for the landlord to come and fix something. Like, you know, that would seem like something easy, but it's not.
And how about reaching out to Wavecrest? What happened when you called them?
They didn't answer.
They were not responsive.
Yeah, like
We tried emailing, and I think we tried calling a couple times
they
on
didn't-
different occasions. No answer.
No answer. Did anybody else experience that? If you're not getting phone calls answered on other stores? Yes. Why don't we shift over to maybe shift over to this group, the Johnny Bell Gabriel Juan group, and you tell us what you worked on and how you got that story, how you worked on your story.
So our group, Gabriel, Daniel, and I, we focused on the Southern Boulevard Coalition, which is a group of, I believe it's 9 nonprofit organizations made up that are from the Bronx, headed by Banana Kelly, Nos Quedamos, Mother on the Move, Local 79. And their goal is to protect the Southern Boulevard part of the Bronx, because they fear that when city planning came up with a plan to rezone, and we all know what the term means, to rezone that area, they were afraid that a lot of people that suffered from displacement from before, it was gonna happen to the same thing in their neighborhood. So they came together with a coalition, and they called it the Southern Coalition, to protect them. They just want transparency and things like that in their neighborhood, or the city plans for them.
Right, so they're skeptical of what's gonna happen. Has the Department of City Planning announced a rezoning plan yet? Don't spin.
As of now, there's just like no definitive answer as to when. Like when asked directly, DCP just could say, stay tuned, see if there's anything gonna happen soon. No real answer as of now.
And if Department of City Planning has not said that they're gonna rezone, they're studying it, they might, but they're not sure they're going to. So why are the people in the coalition so, they're on the offense almost, right? Like, why are they so organized already when there hasn't even been a rezoning announced?
Because they feel, I spoke to organizers and people from those organizations. For instance, like Jasmine Vega, she's from Waco, an organization who is part of the Southern Boulevard Coalition. And I spoke to her, and she said that if the city plans to bring more affordable housing into the Southern Boulevard area to qualify for those affordable housing, that people need to have a certain amount of income. But those people living there, the residents, don't make enough money to apply or qualify for the housing. So then she said affordable for who? So then if it is not for the people there. That's one thing she said to me.
Right, nice. And who are some of the other people you spoke to? Or what's kind of the ways you guys all did reporting, you three?
So we spoke to, like I said, different organizations, such as people from The Point, which is another organization, and one to Dariela Rodriguez. She said that she doesn't, once the city she doesn't believe that the plan the city has is good for them, because the same reason Vega said. Also because when they tend to leave people out, that's how they feel. Some of the things they feel, and also because even if when they follow the plan, they are like excluded.
And can you tell us a little bit, you went on this walking tour on Saturday morning, right, this past Saturday. So you've done a lot of reporting, you guys went to a big public meeting that a bunch of tenants and activists and organizers were at. You interviewed a bunch of different people, other people came to our class, but then on Saturday you went to this walking tour. Can you tell us about the walking tour?
Yes, the walking tour was taking a walk around the Kelly Street area, and we went to the places where developers have bought property and that are under construction. And even if one of the organizers said, even if the zoning hasn't been passed yet, she mentioned how developers are buying property, which leads to the increasement of rents around the area, and that's something they don't agree on. And also we walked to the murals where the street art is located, and they talk about how there's a tourist bus which comes there, and to bring the tourists to take pictures of the Bronx, take pictures of the murals, but they are supposed to contribute to the economy, but they just come, take the pictures, and then they leave. That's something one of the organizers said.
Yeah. And where were those murals?
They are located there, like in the Southern Boulevard. I don't have like the address, exact address, but like it's very close.
Yeah.
The Westchester,
Okay.
Kelly Street, somewhere.
Nice. Maybe that's a good segue to you, right? Jemiah, who's done you and your partner were doing mural reporting. So tell us about that work.
So we did a report based on the mural that's located at 1224 Southern Boulevard. It was created by Charlie Ilo. He's an artist. And basically, we started off by researching the Southern Boulevard mural to see if there were any pictures of it on Google, like if it's really known or anything like that. And an Eventbrite came up. So we learned that it was an event that happened around August, and they invited people in the Southern Boulevard community to come out and help them create the mural.
And can you describe it? What does it look like?
So basically it's a mural where there's like a little girl who actually looks very sad, and on her shirt it says, "I love the Bronx." And then there's also trains, like the 2 train coming towards her in the mural, and like she's throwing away trash, and then there's a sign, it's like a street sign, and it says "Save Southern Boulevard." So yeah, that's basically what the mural looks like. We found out that Wedco was the ones that put the event together. We emailed and phoned and called, to try to see who can speak to us. We emailed several times, and we were getting responses, but no one ever answered our questions fully. The person that we emailed was actually Yasmin Vega. She told us that she would answer our questions, but she never got back to us. So that didn't work out well, but the artist, Charlie Elo, it took him a while, but he ended up responding to us, and he let us know that he had created that mural as well as others, if I'm not mistaken, in the Southern Boulevard area. But we didn't get to go to visit the others as of yet.
Right.
So yeah.
Yeah, and so that was a nice example of, we saw something physically. I was actually down in that neighborhood when I started assigning these projects. I was meeting somebody, and we were supposed to go out to dinner, and I'm like, you know what, we're going to go out to dinner along Southern Boulevard on 174th, because my students are all going to be investigating that neighborhood, so let's you and me just spend a couple hours walking around there. So I did that at the beginning of the semester, because I wanted to see what I could see, because it was basically around the time you guys had that assignment. Remember, very early in the semester, one of the weekend assignments was literally like, go take a walk, spend 2 hours in the neighborhood, notice what you notice, write some things down, keep your eyes open, right? Like being a reporter walking is so different than being a person with your headphones in and your phone here. But rather that we go for these walks with our eyes and our pores open. So anyway, I did that, saw that mural, I was like, oh, great, here's a story. But that type of reporting is a nice example of the kind of multi-platform reporting even that we do, right? So very old-fashioned, I saw a mural, I thought it was interesting, I assigned a story. But then you guys went there and looked at it as well, but you also were able to find this, 5-month-old Eventbrite, but through the Eventbrite you got some contact information. And then you were able to get Elo, I think, on Instagram, yes. Right? Like you were able to hit him up that way, eventually to get him to talk to you in a more old-fashioned way, over email and eventually over the phone. And then you also did the reporting of going and standing in front of the mural and asking people what they thought about it and knocking on doors, yeah? Did anybody, when you were doing that reporting, talk a little bit about there's this kind of rich irony happening, right, where obviously graffiti art is one of the many inventions of the Bronx, right? It's something that people are really proud of, that this is an art form used around the world in multiple languages now that was born in this place. And it's always had these kind of political and social uses, that you make murals, you communicate things through it, whether they're just communicating a we're still here, you haven't burned us out, or whether they're communicating a we've been reborn, or a we're staying. But it's also, as you suggest in these tours, it's kind of an agent of destruction, right? Like there's all this pride about Bronx graffiti art, but the coolness of Bronx graffiti art is one of the things that's going to be bringing people in to hippify the neighborhood. Did Elo talk about that at all, or did any of the people you speak to talk about that?
No, actually they didn't. It was like going out and reporting and trying to speak to people was very interesting, because we would ask them like, oh, the mural. It would be, we went into stores that were like right near the mural, schools right near the mural, and everybody was just so unaware that it was there. And I'm just like, it's right there, right across the street from the school that you work at. And everybody's just like, what mural? I don't know what you're talking about. And then finally we did reach a guy. We spoke to a guy that we saw outside, and like his response to it was just like not really what I expected, because he was saying that, yeah, okay, they painted a mural, but no one cares. And I'm like, okay. So like no one really wanted to talk, no one wanted to give their name, everyone we tried to talk to, no one knew about the mural, and he said that no one cares because it's like he basically felt like it is what it is. If they're gonna rezone the neighborhood, it is what it is. And that no one's gonna pay attention to it because it's just gonna happen. And I was just, I don't know, it's kind of surprising to hear like that perspective of it all. But no one really was interested in the topic as much as I thought they would, being that it was their community.
Right. So that's a really interesting, it's kind of like a sampling issue, right? Like you were there standing on the street talking to not pre-selected people, just random people coming by, or random people you found I think you went to some schools and stuff too. Versus the people that Juan and Johnny Bell and Gabrielle and a few other students went to those meetings too, where these were the people who selected themselves and were engaged and did have a lot to say. So that's just an interesting thing to think about when you see stories reported that are not reported by journalists but rather by activists. Obviously they're only going to talk to the people who agree, right? And so much of our way we gather information now is through self-reported stories, and there's a reason for that, right? So many people's stories have been excluded historically, or covered in a really slanted or biased or unfair way, and so people just kind of tell their own story, but they're only going to tell their own story, right? So you're only going to get the really active, articulate, ready, politically engaged people in that, in that Instagram story, versus going out and just talking to a randomly selected, it's a more complex narrative. It's a more complex story, especially when we put together this package where we've got 1, 2, 3, 4 different 2, 3, 4, 5 different stories on different aspects of this complicated thing that's happening. How about you guys? Can you talk a little bit, Albert and Danielle, about your work and where it began, actually? And maybe you can talk, and other people might jump in, about the database work we did and the like data manipulation. Yeah.
So for the data part, we, you know, like all of us together, we looked at the DAP map and we had Lucy Block come in, but before that, we looked at it before, and we looked at the areas, the zone, we focused on the Southern Bronx Coalition, like that area. We learned about the Southern Bronx Coalition, the different teams, as Mom mentioned, the different parts that make up that coalition, what they are, what they focus on, why they're coming together, basically to prevent dislocation, like moving, like people, the residents that live there being forced out of their homes due to not being able to afford the rent anymore, displacement. So we looked at that, we looked at those that were owning, like the people that own the buildings in that area, we looked at the violations.
Right.
We looked at the violations in that area, so that made up the chart that we made up. So we made a chart of the recent sales from this year and last year, and we looked at who were the people that were buying up, and we noticed that Banana Kelly was one of the people that were buying a lot of properties. And then we had Harry came in, so we learned from him, and we used that in our article. So then we learned that Banana Kelly is a nonprofit organization, but even though they are a nonprofit, that they were still buying up a lot of property to help the community, the people in the community, and to help prevent displacement. So when we noticed that even though they were buying up property, they still had trouble managing the property that they were owning. So from the date of purchase to now, there were still like lasting violations, which was the problem.
So, and according to Mr. Just, he works at Banana Kelly. He said that the reason why they still have violations is because they just got some, recently they got buildings that they made a plan to fix the problems, and he said that it takes time because they have building first that they have to work on, and then they work in the building they got recently. So that's why they still have building that still have violations.
And then one of the other aspects that was hard was that because they're a nonprofit, they only have a certain amount of funds that they focus on to maintain their buildings. Like they don't raise rents on behalf of the tenants to take care of the violations that they have. So they would have to take out loans from the government or even use any extra from another building to fix the problems for another building. So it's kind of like shuffling around funds and trying to figure out and maintain the buildings that they have while they're still trying to help the people in the community as part of the Bronx Coalition.
I think this was one of the, I really like this story because it was unexpected, right? We started by doing all this data collection, when we started by like learning about the South Bronx and learning about rezoning and reading all these old articles and having different people come and talk to us and learning about the data analysis that the DAP map, which is Displacement Alert Project. It's a compilation of open public records, right? From HPD, which is the city's Housing Preservation Development Department Housing. It's the Department of Buildings information and the city's Department of Taxation information, because when property is sold, there's a tax record of it, and that's how you can find out who bought or sold a building. So the DAP map, which is a coalition of nonprofit housing developers, put together this data. But it's all these publicly available public information from those city departments anyway. They just put it in one place. We use that data, right, to be like, well, who's buying the Bronx? There's this chant, and the activists use this chant, who's Bronx? Our Bronx. It's like our Bronx. So what does that mean? And whose Bronx actually is it? That's what we were trying to look at, right? We have what we might think and what our political sympathies might be when you're in a room like that. But then we have our job as reporters to just look at cold hard numbers, right? And then to marry these things together. But in looking at the numbers, we are like, all right, well, who is buying the Bronx? Is somebody buying the Bronx? And the Bronx is a big place with 1.5 million people in it. So we're just going to zone in on this little area. But because of the Department of Taxation records, we were able to see all the property sales within this area in the last couple of years. And do you remember what our start point was? Like, what was the event we used as a, let's look at who bought property from, it's actually from the beginning of 2017. Anybody remember what our triggering,
Is that when they changed the laws for housing, for rent owners?
that
They-
was more recent, but it was, that's when the Department of City Planning announced that it was gonna start looking at this neighborhood, right? That it was gonna start thinking about maybe rezoning this neighborhood. Not that they were gonna rezone it, but, all right, we're gonna study. And the idea was, okay, if you're interested in buying up property on the idea that it's gonna soon be way more valuable because some rules will have changed, because this endless wave of gentrification will have moved up another this many blocks. Let's see who jumps in after 2017, right? So can somebody talk about, do you remember this period when we looked at the big map and we divided it up by, everybody had 4 blocks they were responsible for? What did everybody do then from the 2017 data forward? People remember their job?
For the chart?
Yeah. Just say that again.
Oh, so yeah, that's when we looked at the chart. So we literally made our own spreadsheet. We looked at the dot map and we recorded what buildings were in that zone that were being purchased. We noted the address, the amount of units in the building, the sale date and the amount, and who was the person that bought the building.
Right, so we had all that nice data, and then what emerged from it was, oh, look, the organization that bought the most, actually, is this nonprofit organization with a long history in the neighborhood. And so then that became the story. Like, the collecting the data drove what we decided was news. And then you had this, and then you guys went in that direction of telling, well, why is this nonprofit buying up so much property, and what's its agenda and what's its goal, and then what are maybe some of its struggles. And then the other group looked at the others. Rose, can you talk a little bit about what some of the work was that your group looked at? What was the big document you based your reporting on?
So it was about the works landlord, the works landlord in the area of Crotona and Southern Avenue. So then we went into the field and figured out that they fastly overnight they correct all anomalies that we'll say about them. Because I went and tried to interview the super and about 10 tenants. So I asked them what they think about their landlord, and the first one told me, I have been here for 41 years. So then, and I move on and I say, do you know how quickly do those your landlord respond to repairs and other concern about your apartment? And she said, yes, quickly. I said, okay. So, and I moved to the next one, like Miss Carmen, and she said, I asked her, how long have you been here? She said, I have been here for 9 years. I said, right. And I said, and how long? I repeat the same question. How long have you, the landlord take to answer your request? No, so quickly. I'm very, happy, so no problem. Then all of them said the same thing. Then I said, no, I have to double check. So I went to the super now, and I said, so then, how long have you been working here? I have been working here for 20 years. I retired, and they called me back. And I said, how is the turnover of tenant? She said, no, we have a long list of. I said, then you don't think that do you think the landlord is a good one? Or he said, yeah, a very good, good landlord. So, and I say, could you give me an address of a works landlord around here. She said, no, you won't find any landlord, works landlord anymore. Everything has been fixed overnight based on the pressure of city and activists. You won't find anyone. So then, but however, according to what we saw in the city, in the official data, I figured out that it was clean. It was the only thing that was consistent with the violation was the door, broken main door. And in our research here in the classroom, we saw that the main door, it was one of the main violations that is rooting in the security of tenants. So then I was, so I don't,
Yeah.
that's what I,
That's what you found. The story is not so simple, and what one
yeah,
person
it's not
says
so
is not the
simple.
whole story.
And what's surprising me is that everybody was there for a while, and I don't know. Another thing I say, what about the main door? Because everybody comes in and do whatever. And he said, no, you know that here you have some people on programs, city program, that kind of people, you may not always discipline them like it should be. So.
Which is a pretty classist thing to say, right? A pretty prejudiced thing to say. Someone receiving rent assistance. Is a bad person,
rent assistance program,
Right,
so then,
right.
and I think, I don't know. So I still feel that it was too beautiful to be true, so then, too beautiful to be true, really. But I wasn't, I would like to go there again and stay longer than before, because I spent only 1 hour there. So, and see, it's too beautiful. And see the magnitude of what is going on in New York City, in New York City. So then it's too beautiful.
Right.
To be consistent with the whole picture of the city.
So altogether, we have an article on what is the Southern Boulevard Coalition and what are their goals and why did they come together and why are they so skeptical. We have the article on the mural as this art form in the neighborhood, and that gets in a little bit to this history of art in the neighborhood. We have the database generated article about who are the landlords who are buying up property in this neighborhood, and are some of these landlords that have been identified elsewhere in the city as having a really high rate of evictions active in this little zone, and the answer is yes, some of them are. And then here are some other landlords active in that area who have a high rate of eviction. And then off of that story is this Banana Kelly has bought up a ton of property and has this goal of defending the neighborhood from displacement. But in the meantime, they have a tremendous number of buildings that are, difficult to manage. And then we have the story about Wavecrest, another actor that is both a property manager and an owner, and their record, which is high violations, high evictions, and yet rewarded by the city government in that they get a big contract for NYCHA. I think that's all the stories. What was the hardest thing reporting? If you look back from the whole span of the semester, what do we feel like we learned, or what was different from what we began with? Yeah.
I feel like it was hard to put everything together because we learned so many different things, and we had people come in and tell us so many different things. So it was hard to figure out what was relevant for your article, what to put together, to gather all your information together. There's so much information, but you have to fine tune it and narrow it down, and still cut out so many things, but you see where it goes when you talk to people. So the putting it together part.
Anybody else? Yeah, I said.
I think the numbers part, getting the percentages and the number of violations, you have to really have your evidence, prove all of that in the paper. So that was the hardest part for me, the numbers.
What were you gonna say, Albert?
I think everything we learned in this class is very important because, for me as a future journalist, I think it's very important to know all these issues about tenants and landlords. In New York, that's one of the main reasons why people are trying to move to another state, and one of the reasons why people are struggling in the city because of the rent. So, and this is something that I really know. So now, like, in the future, I can know how to use the DAP map, how to find violations. And I think it's very important because in case we have to report something about landlords or tenants, so I know how to find like the data in the information and proof as well.
Nice. Anybody want to talk about I'll let somebody else go. The experience of talking to people, right? Looking in the numbers and looking at the data was one thing, and building a database and dividing up information. But somebody talk about the experience of knocking on doors or going to meetings or these one-on-one conversations. Yeah.
I mean, like I had mentioned from my story, just getting in contact with everyone was so difficult, and I think like that's just like something that can be very difficult in journalism, like as a whole. Like just trying to contact people, the most important people that you need to speak to you for your story sometimes just won't respond. And it's kind of hard to like put your story together when you really want their response and their input. So I think that's just something like to learn and to learn how to get around that and how to still formulate the story without their response.
Yeah.
That's exactly what Amaya said, like, it's like you have to basically build up the courage to go and talk to people, and you're dreading it, and then you finally do it, and people are constantly rejecting you left and right, and you're like, okay, how am I gonna make this story work? And like, it took up until, I think yesterday, where ISO2 was emailing the lawyers, constantly sending the email over and over again, no reply. And it's kind of just like, you have to be annoying. Like, it doesn't matter, like, you have to be annoying, but you have to be respectful at the same time. Because it's like, you want to build a good article with good evidence and good quotes. So it's kind of just like, you have to be persistent. And you learn to be like, okay, people are going to say no, but like, I need this person to say yes, and I'm going to get them to say yes. So it was kind of a challenge doing that, yeah.
I think the hardest part for me was seeing the information kind of like reoccur in that map, like when you saw violations from, like, because when we think of displacement or like people getting evicted, we kind of like always identify it with gentrification or like other people coming to move into these buildings and paying more rent. So I think for me, like when I was seeing the information and looking at the statistics, and when it was a tenant or a certain apartment where the violations and stuff kept reoccurring, it was kind of like hard because my dad, he works with the housing lawyer, so he works for the Department of Social Services. So his job is basically like assisting people who are going to get kicked out of their homes and evicted, and they come to him and he finds them resources. So when I spoke to him, he was basically saying like, the hardest part of his job is when people fall behind on their rent more than once. Like, it's hard, but the city kind of gives up on people like that. So that's the hardest thing to see, like when somebody is you know, like, it's hard, like they give up on people. It's hard to see that information, like it's hard.
Right, that's it, right? Like, we began this, all right, most of you were from the Bronx, a couple live in Yonkers, but like, people know this reality, people know this world. Everybody has relatives and friends and themselves who pay too much rent. Plenty of us know people in the shelter system, plenty of people have gone through the shelter system, and so it's a very live, real issue, right? And we're trying to walk this interesting line of, well, we're writing about this because we care about it, because we live in the Bronx and we see neighborhoods changing. And we know that there are 60,000 homeless people in New York City, a whole good-sized city worth of people who can't afford a place to live. And how does that happen, right? So on the one hand, there's all this like passion and emotion and personal investment in it. And at the same time, like, you can never get rid of that, right? But at the same time, we have these methods we can use which are rational, and I forget if it's right brain or left brain, whatever. It's the unemotional part of your brain. You're like, well, we got numbers, we got spreadsheets, we got data, we got X number of interviews. And so you can address this thing that you have a sense of. And right, if we live in this borough, we see it changing and we have a sense of it, and we have this sort of, a lot of it informed by the past, a lot of it about fear, and a lot of it about funny little silly things that you're like, oh my God, there's organic milk in my neighborhood, there goes the neighborhood, right? But on the other hand, you can't really write about that, like, that's just emotion. We're bringing in reason and fact and argument and data. But all that emotion is still back there, and that's not bad, right? Whenever I speak to like big accomplished journalists about what shapes their work, what people say is, oh, anger, right? Like a healthy sense of anger and outrage at things being wrong. That doesn't mean you take every activist's line, hook, line, and sinker. It doesn't mean that you don't give the landlords a fair shake to explain what their agenda is and what they're working on. But you can be angry or hurt or scandalized that so many people in New York City are homeless. You can be angry and hurt and scandalized that these neighborhoods that were left for dead and that rebuilt themselves are now people are being moved out of them, neighborhood by neighborhood. And some people's job is to shout about that or march about that. And then other people's job is to like step back a little bit and use our left brain and look at information and provide dispassionate facts, right? But it's a hard thing because we're obviously always still human and in it, and we wouldn't be writing about this stuff if we didn't think it was important, right? That's sort of the mix. That's why I think this class with these people in it is valuable, right? It would be a different kind of reporting if we all had people from Iowa who might be able to look at the housing code violation stuff, but wouldn't have the same investment, right? And so then it's always just sort of this balancing act of how do you have an investment in the story because you care about it, because you're a person who lives in the neighborhood, but keep up your best practices of journalism, and those best practices are not shaving the numbers if they look a little funny, right? Calling back and making sure everybody gives you the full story, checking whatever your sympathies are and being extra hard on those people, right? Checking whatever you're like, who you think is the bad guy in the story and being extra fair to those people, right? And making sure you make room for all of the complexity, which is why we have 5 stories in this class, right? 5 different little peel-offs of one big issue. Late in the game, just last week, you all had this assignment of, and we did it as kind of like a deadline assignment of that racial displacement study. Can somebody talk about that article, the report that you read? Some people in the other class, I think, went down to the press conference, but did anybody in this class go down to the City Hall press conference?
Yes.
No. Oh, you did?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, the press conference was at City Hall, and it was organized by the Churches United for Fair Housing, and also there were many organizations such as Banana Kelly and Local 79, they were there. And then they were demanding the city to pass the intro bill 5072, which is the racial impact study. So it is like a study of a neighborhood. For instance, the Churches United analyzed the reason or gentrified neighborhoods of Williamsburg, Park Slope, and Greenpoint after the 2005 rezoning, which where they noticed there was a decline on the population of African American, Latinos, and colored people. They were displaced after the rezone of 2005. So what they're asking is for a hearing or in this bill to be passed, so each time a rezone is introduced to the racial impact study has to be there, like to analyze the effects that this rezone have.
Right, a racial impact study, right? And it's kind of a spin-off on something that already happens in the city's Uniform Land Use Review process, ULURP. When you're going to rezone a neighborhood or change the uses of the land even in smaller ways, have a big construction, have change of how the roads are done, stuff like that, you have to do an environmental impact study, which talks about, water quality and how the sewers are going to be used and stuff like that, and also talks about the, not just ecological environment, but if we build this hospital in this place, what's that going to do to traffic? What's that going to do to train use? What's that going to do to how many people are in the schools? Like the impact in the environment in this area. And these people are saying that you need to, that's great, environmental impact study. you also need to do a racial impact study. If you rezone this neighborhood, who's gonna live there 5 years from now? What's gonna be the impact of the rezoning? Because you look at Bushwick and Williamsburg and you see that these are places that have become dramatically more white over time. And you can look at a couple of other rezonings around the city, and this is the pattern. Which is why, right, the Southern Boulevard Coalition people got together. So like, we've seen this story elsewhere, and we don't want it to happen in our neighborhood now. And so that's why these veterans of the old days are still working together on this kind of opposite problem. What was the hardest part about writing? Or was it harder or easier to write these kinds of stories where you have a big collection of facts?
To me, I remember I went out for the works landlord. Works landlord, and what's surprising me, when I saw someone who has lived there for 41 years, I didn't want to say, I said, oh, no, I won't include this because it's about the works landlord. And you say, no, you have to just take the facts and report them just like they are. Do not suppress anything, just keep everything, and you include it, and you say, no, you have to keep the 41 years lady who lived there. So then, it was, to me, it was a great lesson, learning how to simply reporting the fact and not include your own opinion or decision. So then, to me, it's a great lesson.
So obviously the class is ending, and we'll get these, you know, by Friday you'll give me back the final versions. It's the third draft of these articles, and they'll go up on the Bronx Journal website. And they'll go up with some art that the student in the other class took, which is great. But if we were to continue, what would be the next story? What are some stories that we didn't get to this semester in this area? Like, what else?
I'm sorry. I would like that we get, poverty in the Bronx. You remember when we have our guest, he said that in the courtroom, 90% of cases are about non-payment. And non-payment usually is tied to poverty and lack of resources. So I would like that we delve into this issue next time. It can be very useful. Because myself, I'm very poor, so you see, so then it would so it would be great, Professor. So then we go out for that, see the roots of different problems, delve into.
We wouldn't have this problem with displacement if we didn't have this problem with people not having enough money. Yeah. Kristen.
Personally, for my group story, I would be very persistent in interviewing Wavecrest and kind of just getting their whole perspective and how they deal with the evictions and how they deal with all the violations and everything, and kind of just focusing more on them. Like, we gave bits and parts of Wavecrest and then some of Tenants and Andrew Darcy, but like the big thing behind the story is Wavecrest and how they have high evictions and high violations and everything. So kind of just going to them and interviewing them and getting their version of the story and trying to be fair on their side as well. Yeah.
Right, yeah. Yeah.
I think maybe the next one could be when people are evicted, like where do they go, and like the shelter system in the Bronx. And if we're focusing in the area, like how many shelters are there? What does it look like for everyone? Because I think people who go into the shelter system are kind of like grouped together, and that's not fair because not everybody's in that position for the same reason. So I'd say I'd want to focus on the shelter system because I deal with a lot of homeless people. So, I just want to know, where do they go when they're evicted? Like, what's their next step?
Yeah, that is a great next story. Danielle.
I was thinking along those lines too, like the actual displacement, because we're using the example that it's happened in other places. So maybe, I guess, compare it to them. Like, how have they processed it? Where have the people gone? What did it look like? What resources did they have for them? And I guess apply it to the Southern Coalition area, like the research that we did, like go back to the original question, like the displacement and how is that going?
Right. Maybe when we publish these, we'll put up a photo from, remember the whiteboard that way back in September, we had all these kind of questions Maybe we could put that with it, right? Because
Yeah.
that was our jumping off point, kind of our petri dish.